And for this section, we're going back to the idea of squares that are joined to the blanket once they're made. But this time I'm going to be using a type of granny square that I like to call a mini granny. Now, these are probably the smallest squares that you could make, and they are just really the first round of a simple granny square. I like to use them quite a lot in my blankets because I think it adds a real pop of colour, and it's going to be a nice focal point for the outside edge of this blanket. Now, this is the mini granny. As you can see, it's just a little square, and I'll show you in a minute how to make it, although I'm sure most of you have an idea of the first round of a simple granny square. I store mine in this little box, or tray, which I find really useful, and I'm going to link where I bought the tray in the description box below. You don't need to invest in the little tray though. The whole point is just to keep the piles of the mini grannies separate by colour. And you could be inventive and use something like a cupcake baking tin, for example. But I'll leave that to you. As you can imagine, you will have a lot of these little squares to make to go around the perimeter of the blanket. In fact, there are 144, and as you're using 6 different colours, you'll be making 24 of each colour. I have put them into the tray in the order in which I'm going to be joining them, because they are actually repeating in 6s all the way round. And just before we start making them, I thought I would explain another reason why I wanted to put these into the blanket, and that's because I do think they look a little bit like sweets, and after all, it's the sweet shop blanket. Once you've got all 144 made, the joining method will be going back to the same method as we used in the centre of the blanket, with the continuous join as you go, and again you'll be using the pale silver. There's not much difference apart from the size of the square, and I'll explain that later on. So for now, we're just going to make a start with making the first little mini granny, and then I'll leave you to have fun making the other 143. Attached my yarn, and I'm going to chain 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So you've got your long or chain of 4, and then I'm going to just find the very first chain stitch and put my hook into it, yarn over, pull through and pull through the loop that's on the hook, and that just gives you a circle which is enclosed and the space in the middle, and we're going to work all the stitches into that middle space. Chain 2, which is the equivalent of the first treble stitch, and yarn over into the middle space, yarn over, pull up the loop, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2. So that's of course just the simple treble stitch, and we've got 2 of those to go in, so that's the first one and this is the second. And then I'm going to form the corner by chaining 2. So you've got chain 2, 2 trebles and another chain 2, and then into the middle again with 3 trebles, 1, 2, and 3, chain 2. You can see the square forming, and 1, 2, 3 trebles and chain 2, and let's have a look and see where we are so far. So we've got our first cluster of 3, our next cluster of 3, and then a third cluster of 3. We've got a fourth one to do to make the fourth side of the square. So that's 1, 2, 3. And finally, the last corner is another chain 2, and then just slip stitch. Now, strictly speaking, you slip stitch into the top of the first chain 2, which is often quite small and tight, and there's no reason why you can't pick up that very first treble crochet stitch and pull through it and your first the loop on the hook, and that's you closed off your square. So that's all it is. It's just the first round of a simple granny square. There you are. So you've got a front like that and a back like that. And just for my benefit, my choice is to make the back of the square what's going to be on the front of the blanket. That is completely your own decision. That's my decision, and the reason I've chosen to make my square show up on its wrong side is because I think it ties in well with the circles in the middle, this kind of slightly more textured look. So with that in mind, I'm going to pull my center tail through to this side, and before you go ahead and make up all your squares, I would finish off that tail. I leave this one because, like I've said in the past, I like to leave my outside tail until it's been attached, but you can pull this and finish it off, and I really recommend that you finish it off. I go round in a couple of directions, really pulling it tight to make sure that it doesn't come out. But if that's finished off, then you've got far fewer tails to have to sew in on the blanket. And actually what I did was, my plan of campaign for making these was to make all 24 of one colour and then sew in the centre ends neatly, make 24 of the next colour and do that, and so on. And that way it's not quite as onerous a task. So I'll be back in just a minute to show you how to start attaching these with the continuous join as you go. This is my first mini granny, and I've turned it onto its reverse side. You don't need to do that. It won't matter to the look of the blanket, particularly if you decide to do yours on the front. It's your choice. My choice is to do it on the reverse because I believe it ties in better with the center circles. So here it is. I'm laying it down in position, so it's going to, the side where we add the joining stitch will work into the corner of the blanket. Doesn't matter which corner, any corner. So I'm going to take the pale silver and I'll just attach the yarn in a corner of this little square. So just in any of the chain 2 corner spaces, I'm just going to attach my yarn. And of course, with it being a joining stitch, I'm using the half treble like I did before. And this is the continuous join as you go, so we're just going to be doing the same as we did in the center. It's just, it looks slightly different because it's on a smaller scale, that's all. And chain 2 for the first equivalent of the half treble stitch, and then 2 half trebles in the corner. 1, 2, and that's yarn over, put in your hook, yarn over, pull up the loop, yarn over, pull all through all 3 loops. and then I'm going to, that's the first half of that corner because of the chain 2 done. There's no space along the side, so it's straight into the next corner with 3 half trebles. 1, 2, 3. Like that. And now we're ready to start attaching this to the blanket. And just before we start, a quick reminder that the continuous join as you go is always worked on the front of the blanket. So check for that stitch marker to make sure that your blanket is front side uppermost, and then you can make a start. So into the corner space of the blanket for a slip stitch, pull it through, and then 3 half trebles to finish off that corner of the little square. Now we've got a space. Before we get to this corner space, we've got before we get to the corner space of the square, there's a space in the blanket. So we're going to slip stitch into that space like that, and then 3 half trebles in the corner of the mini granny, and then into the next space. Just look for that, don't split it. There's that cluster of 3 and 1, so it's into this next space along, and a slip stitch, and then 3 half trebles to finish off the corner of the mini granny. And then down to the bottom and 3 half trebles. I'll show you what it looks like when I've finished this corner, well, half of this corner. So that's what the first square looks like attached to the blanket. It hasn't been finished off with the silver along the bottom yet, because that gets done when you've got them all joined on 3 sides. You come all the way along to finish off in one movement the 4th side. So for the time being, it's over to the next square, and it's time to attach that. I've got it on its reverse side, and just 3 half trebles into the corner of it. 2, 3, and as you can see, if I lay that down, it is lining up with the pale grey in the previous square. Now the previous square has got a centre space now, since it's got this extra round on it, so I'm going to go in there and pull up a slip stitch, and then first 3 half trebles of the corner of the lilac square, and then it's time to work into this space, which we already have a slip stitch in from the first square. Now if I do that, I'll just do it just now and let you see it. If I put a slip stitch in there, there is a tendency, once you've got everything joined, for a big gap to show. So to avoid that, because it's basically you're sharing a space which is quite big and it can open up. So what I tend to do is to, after my 3 half trebles, before I do my slip stitch into the blanket, find the corner space of the previous square and put a slip stitch in there, and then a slip stitch into the space in the blanket, and that just holds things a bit tighter. And then you can finish off that corner with your 3 half trebles. And there you can see it attached. Now into the next space along, and 3 half trebles to start your corner space. And then you've got your next space along for your slip stitch. So you've slip stitched into one space in the middle and then again at the corner. And you can see how that is joining. And you've got these little sweet shapes beginning to appear. Now, what I think is really important to do is, as you're making these squares, keep looking at this edge on the blanket, because it is very easy to miss one of these spaces and not put your slip stitch into it. And you don't notice it as you're doing it sometimes. But by the time you get along to the end of the side, if you have missed one of those slip stitches in one of these spaces, in other words, if one of these spaces is empty, that's going to throw out your count and your mini granny is not going to fit in. It's going to look as if it's, not been counted wrong. And that's one of the most common messages and emails I get asking for help because they can't get the mini grannies to fit. So as you're working along, just make sure that you've got that middle one slip stitched into so that everything is working along in the right order. So the next colour I'm picking up is my variegated one, and it just happens to be in the kind of goldy tones. So that's going to look quite nice, I think, against that dark lilac. I've just got to finish this off with 3 half trebles. 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2, 3. There we go. And it's time to pick up this one, which is just done exactly the same way. I'll do one more and then I'll leave you to work along. And following the pattern and the sequence of the colours, it will be quite easy. So it's 1, 2, 3, slip stitch. Now this, if you're a complete beginner to crochet, this can throw quite a lot of people. Like I've mentioned it already, I'll just mention it again. When I was coming down this side of the lilac, I said I would complete my 3 half trebles and then straight down to the bottom because there wasn't a space. But there is a space now because that's what you've just created. So you put your hook in and make your slip stitch coming up the way, and take this end out of the way, and then 3 half trebles into the corner. 1, 2, 3, and then slip stitch into the top corner of the silver grey and also into the space that's shared with the second square, and then 3 half trebles to finish it, that corner I mean, 2, 3, and then into that middle. When I say middle, it's the middle of this square. It's the next space along in the blanket, slip stitch, and then into the corner with 3 half trebles again. And into the space in the blanket. So I've done kind of 2/3 of that third square. And there you can see how it's looking. There's still this bottom edge to finish off at the end once we've gone round all 120 of these. I'm going to continue working all the way around with these, and I will see you back when it's time to do the outside edge. But I hope you have fun with the mini grannies. I think the look is going to be quite nice. It's going to give you a nice edging, as I said, to the rest of the blanket. So I'll see you when I've got all the way round. So I have to just attach this last mini granny with the half trebles, of course. 2, 3, slip stitch into the middle of the previous square, and 1, 2, 3, and slip stitch I'm just going to work into the corner of the blanket as well, just to make sure it's anchored nice and firmly. And then I just need to finish off on the second side, because of course the corner squares at this point are only worked on 2 sides. So that's one set of half trebles, slip stitch, and the last for this part of the square. 1, 2, 3. There we go. Now, what I'm going to do here, it's debatable. You can, of course, slip stitch into the corner of the first square. I didn't do that when I was working around in the larger squares. I left that and just completed this corner, so I'll just do that this time. So it's chain 2. Right, so I have got to this corner of the peach coloured square, and I'm chained 2, and my next job is to start and work all the way back round the outside edge. And this is where we're going to be just a little bit different, because I think I want this outside edge to be a fraction wider than the half trebles, just to kind of balance up. If you can look here where we had the last lot of pale silver granny clusters. So what I'm going to do is I've chained 2, and I'm going to put 3 treble stitches into the second half of that corner. 1, 2, 3. It's not much bigger, but you can see that it is just a little. And then into the actual corner of the blanket now, and that's 1, 2, 3 trebles, chain 2, and 1, 2. I'm actually going to stop the video for just a second because I have run out of silver. I'm going to have to start a new piece of silver, so I'll do that off camera and be back in 2 seconds. Once you've got this corner complete with the 2 lots of treble 3, you'll see that immediately afterwards you're on to this other part, this bit where the squares meet. In fact, there are no clusters between these. These are just the joins at every point. So what you want to do, if you'll remember, is complete this corner first with 3 treble stitches. 1, 2, 3. And then we have to complete this corner, but we've got this bit to get over first. So chain 1, slip stitch into that big space in the join, and chain 1 again, and then we're much closer to the next corner, and 3 trebles. 1, 2, 3. So there we have the beginning of the outside edge of the mini grannies, and I'll do that once more. It's straight into the next join, so it's treble 3 in the first corner. Just make sure I don't pick up a stray end. 1, 2, 3. Chain 1, slip stitch into the space between the squares, chain 1, and then 3 trebles in the second corner. Got a squeaky hook tonight. I'm actually working in artificial light because I'm working in the evening, just so that I can catch up. I've got an end. I've got a lot of ends that need to be sewn in, and that will be my next job. But there you have the little mini grannies completely surrounded by the pale silver. So if you forget to do this outside edge, the next part won't fit. So just be sure that you've got this completely surrounded, each of these little mini grannies completely surrounded by the pale silver. This is not going to go round all 4 sides. I've been using up little bits and pieces, so this will go so far and then I'll join in another length, but I will work all the way around all 4 sides, and I'll see you when we're back at this point here. Hello again. I've finished all the 4 sides joining the mini grannies. All 144 are now attached, and this is where I started and finished, and you can see my end here. The very last few stitches I put in on the outside edge was to finish off the very first corner where we started right at the beginning. So that finished off with treble 3, chain 2, slip stitch into the top of the very first chain 2, and then also slip stitch across into the corner of this square to tie the whole thing together. And that is the round of mini grannies complete. You can heave a sigh of relief if you like, but I really like the effect. Now, first of all, before we move on to the next part, I just want to explain that we have a storm outside today blowing, and upstairs is very noisy and rattly. So I've come downstairs where it's a little bit quieter, but this is why this might look, the light is different down here. So things might look a little bit different, but that's why.